You're listening to the Aesthetically Speaking podcast, presented by Nextech.
You're listening to the Aesthetically Speaking podcast, presented by Nextech. I'm Robin in tow, and we are coming to you live from the American Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery here in Austin, Texas. So excited to be here, and today I have a special guest, Dr. Tiffany McCormack. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh yeah, and it's day one. We are on the show floor. This is not the first time that Nextech has hosted our podcast on the show floor. So it's exciting to actually be live and in person and engage. And then also as we're podcasting, be distracted as people are walking by waving and wanting to say hello. And I'm like, please don't distract me.
It's good to see old friends.
It is good to see old friends. It's great. But I also, though, do feel a new energy this year. I feel there's been a lot of effort in this society to really engage at a different level, bring in different brands, but also bring in different organizations. So I'm excited about what's to come here. But let's first talk about you and a little bit about your practice. And let's tell our listeners who you are, where you practice, and how long you've been in practice.
Great. Thank you. My name is Tiffany McCormack, as you stated. I am a board-certified plastic surgeon in Reno, Nevada. I trained at Stanford in the Bay Area, and after completing my training, I moved to Reno to be closer to family. I started my own practice in 2008 and have since grown pretty substantially. I have a 12,000 square foot building with my own surgery center, medical spa, and plastic surgery practice.
Wow, it's extensive. How many providers are below you that actually offer those non-surgical treatments?
I currently have roughly 8 providers who, between estheticians and RNs, who do lasers and injectables and chemical peels and all kinds of things. I also have another plastic surgeon, Dr. Jocelyn, who joined me a year ago.
Very nice. Wow, flourishing, it sounds like.
It's going great.
Yeah. What are some of the different types of specialty treatments that you might offer in your med spa? Or do you find that a lot of it is standard? If I was looking for a med spa that, we hear a lot about PRP these days.
Mm-hmm. We definitely offer that. We also use exosomes at this point. We do, we have a lot of laser resurfacing procedures and hair removal. We offer vaginal rejuvenation with FemTouch, hair restoration, and PRP's really been great with that as an adjunct, as well as for our resurfacing procedures.
It's fascinating because there's so many different, from when you think head to toe, we think about the non-surgical options that are available. And for so many years, think about when you started in 2008. Mm-hmm. What did we have then? And where has technology really taken us? It's vastly changed this market. In a lot of great ways too.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting, we have so many new neuromodulators out there, right? Back in the day, it was just Botox. That's all anyone ever knew.
Right.
Now we have Dysport and Jeuveau and Daxify and just lots of different options in that arena. I think a lot of our fillers have changed with the level of viscosity and the ability to treat really fine lines versus like heavier areas for more of a lift or just more thickness in the fill. So a lot of different options there. Energy device-wise, I would venture to say not a lot of huge changes in that regard, but I think that the way that we think about recovery from those devices, and that's where my exosomes and PRP come in, that has changed, and just kind of really caring for the quality of the skin moving forward and maintaining those results and again, enhancing that recovery process.
It's interesting that you would say how we've changed that recovery period. I think about years ago when the ablative lasers really became a thing. And wow, I mean, that was a little frightening.
It was. And, we ran into issues like hypopigmentation in certain areas. And of course, like post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, we weren't necessarily pre-treating for those. And instead of using a fractionated CO2, for instance, we were using a full CO2. So we didn't have that same rate of healing. And again, that increased risk for hyperpigmentation. So I would say that changed pretty early on in my practice. I never owned a fully ablative CO2. I've always had a fractionated CO2.
Right.
But yeah, gone are the days where you had this really ablative laser and you had to hide out for 2 to 3 weeks before you could even be seen in public again. Now we find that our patients within 5 to 7 days have a full face of makeup on.
So, thinking about the fact that you've got a very well established plastic surgery practice, as well as sounds like a very established med spa within your community, if you think back to when you started your journey and you started as a plastic surgeon, did you ever think that you would be this far along with the diversity within your business and having a med spa? And you said you did hair as well. I mean, I think that you've really diversified.
Yeah.
What brought that on?
Definitely time. You're absolutely right. I didn't ever imagine I would grow to the point where I've gotten to now. So when I first started, it was me, and then my stepmom was my injector, and she's amazing. She's a great nurse. But of course, the time came where she did retire, which absolutely devastated me because she's so good, and so many patients were so sad about it. But we brought in another injector at that time, who she trained. So we basically said, hey, here are all our patients. You're going to learn from the best, and, handed it over. She promptly left the practice probably within a year to go work in another place where she thought she would, I don't know, make more money or whatever. I decided that day, gosh, I never want to have to rely on one injector. It doesn't make sense. So from that point on, kind of always hiring. And so we brought in a couple of injectors and then eventually a couple more. And it's just given us more flexibility in that, I have one injector who's amazing but doesn't really want to work 5 days a week. And I understand that. Her love language is time off. So, rather than we don't have an injector on Mondays, rather than that thought process, we just, we hired another part-timer who wanted to work Mondays and maybe later hours, but wanted flexibility for time off for childcare. So I feel like we're able to really bring in the best talent and kind of work around the schedules that they want to work around and still have a fully functional round-the-clock running business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And we're going to get into this a little bit later when we go back and talk about some hot topics. But you said something that I think is profound. You've managed to protect your brand by expanding the number of people that you have in your business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy to do in today's environment because we know that injectables encompass a very large percentage of what med spas offer in their services. I think the stats were something like it was more in the 80% range, but it's a very high number regardless. So when we think about the competitive nature, so even 10 years ago, plastic surgeons, dermatologists, it pretty much stayed true to the specialty that was really going to offer aesthetics, and that's where you would go to have those treatments. And now enter into the market a vast number of med spas, and then those med spas actually are driving a higher level of competition. But also what I'm seeing and hearing from other physicians and practices is poaching. So we're starting to hear where if they're valuable, and social media does help us show that value in a lot of different ways because where they show up, now you see that they're gaining awareness, and then competition or other people start to value what you already have. How do you protect yourselves against poaching? A strong word.
Yeah, no.
Don't know that there's a better one, but
it's very real. It's very real. I mean, I have a different take on competition. I think it's a good thing overall because it really does increase brand awareness for the things that we're doing. And I feel like we have such a quality service and such quality providers and great training in place for all of them. So, well, two things. Number one, that the more people out there who know about it and are getting these treatments and services, the more they're talking about it and the more awareness in the community there is. And obviously we can't serve every single person in our community. So I think an example of that would be what used to be Zeltique is now Cool Sculpting. I had that machine in 2009 or 2010. I was the first person in Nevada by far. And I was like, hey guys, we have this great fat reduction, non-invasive machine. Everyone come and try it. No one had heard of it. And so even the other plastic surgeons in town were saying, that doesn't work, that couldn't work, and telling, people not to have it done. And it was, on one hand, great to be the innovator and have it in my practice. On the other hand, it was hard for me to even convince people to come in and try it. fast forward several years, everyone knows what it is, right?
Right.
And so we're actually busier now despite more competition than we were back then for that reason.
Yeah. Competition does drive a sense of awareness. I think that absolutely speaks true, and I think social media definitely has helped spur that on.
And to your point about how do you kind of stay afloat, I guess, amongst a lot of competition, I'll go back to it again. It's that quality of service. I think two other things I would mention. Number one, as a surgeon, we don't offer everybody non-surgical treatments that aren't going to work on them, and we have surgery to offer too. So reputationally, I think people understand we're not going to sell them a bunch of non-invasive procedures for a quote facelift when they need a facelift. We just won't waste their money that way, and I think that's helped to uphold our reputation in town. I think the other thing is community outreach, right? So every year we do a Bundle Up for Botox campaign where, people come in and they donate scarves and mittens and hats and things for children, and they get a heavily discounted rate on Botox, and we run that through the winter. And then we do another one for high school students a little bit later in the year. And honestly, it's become so big, we have to get like pickup trucks to come and take all the boxes of stuff that we donate to the community. So I think community outreach is important as well.
You've built quite the brand. It's impressive because
Thank you.
just from the community outreach perspective, I think that drives an internal sense of pride.
Yeah.
And I think pride is also then what lends itself to commitment and staff wanting to belong to something like that.
Yeah.
And feeling like they're really pulling together for something better beyond just, okay, we're going to make people look better, we're going to make people feel better, but we're also going to give back.
Yeah, I think it's important, especially we're in a relatively small community. Reno's not a giant city. So, there is that sense of kind of belonging and togetherness that I think has really been important for all of us.
Well, I think it also differentiates you too.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to put forth that effort, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that. Not everybody wants to give back to the community, but they also don't find a sense of pride in it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for it. Kudos to you and congratulations to your practice.
Thank you.
I think that you think about all the different generations of people that are employed by you. I'm sure you probably have many different generations. It sounds like you have quite the large staff. I think that there's also a part of this that's important for them when you think about how they want to feel included and they want to be part of decisions and they want to have an impact. And it's a good way to do it. I think at Next Tech, one of the things that we've really focused on is we have something called employee belonging groups. And so when you're well over 500 employees, you want to give people a sense of, a level,
Connection.
right? A connection, but on a level platform. So it doesn't matter what your role is in the business. It doesn't matter whether you're, a vice president or an SVP or if you're an individual contributor. The goal is to bring everybody together on one level set and work towards a common goal.
Love that.
And it really fosters a different type of relationship. I love it because I get to meet people that I normally wouldn't get to spend time with because it's just not part of my focus. And so it's just a new way of really getting people involved. And I think that as organizations grow and they really truly bring culture into play, it's key. I think it's one of the things that we're very focused on at Next Tech is culture. Our CEO says it so well. He's like, culture eats strategy for lunch.
Oh, yeah. I think it's an interesting point that you bring up. Having started out with, 2-3 employees for a couple of years and growing to around 30 at this point, we had some growing pains culturally because, you're bringing in a really diverse set of people. It's no longer like people don't have the same access to me, for instance, as, older employees would have had because we were all it was just us, right? This core little group. And now that we've expanded, I've had to really make an effort to make sure that I still can stay somewhat personally connected to my employees and make sure that they know I still am an ear to them, that they can come to me, I'm approachable. But there are growing pains, I think, with any company. And you're right. I think the backbone of success is that culture. If you can maintain that over time, I think that's really important. But it's hard to do.
Considering all the technology that you brought into your business, considering the growth and what you've seen with your staff, how do you balance education with your staff, culture, as we just talked about, and infusing that positivity, but then also really...
Expectations.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you do? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the trickiest part, right? I want to be everybody's best friend. They want to be my best friend. We want this amazing culture. But yeah, high expectations, because really what it boils down to is the patient care, right? And the patient experience. And you just have to make sure that your staff kind of understands that underlying truth, that if you don't have patience, no matter how much you all get along and how much, your culture is on point, then it doesn't mean anything. And so it is, I mean, yes, culture helps you work cohesively together, of course.
Right.
But the next step forward from that is just really always making sure the patient comes first, and understanding that, that the trainings and the education are all just really putting you in a position to best treat a patient. And, I guess what I mean by that is, obviously I do surgery. Maybe I do surgery, then we send a patient up to get MLDs, which is lymphatic massage. Afterwards, let's just say we did a tummy tuck, or let's say facelift, for instance.
Right.
And we send them up to get their massages afterwards to the medical spa. Well, now, this patient has this connection and experience with us downstairs, my med spa's upstairs. And now I'm kind of sending that patient forward, but it's still an extension of my practice. And the expectation is that that patient will be treated the same way that I treated that patient, and that patient will get ongoing skincare advice and management, and just someone to kind of hold their hand through the rest of the process. So there's a lot of me relying on that ancillary staff to kind of continue that process that we've already started at one level, or vice versa. Maybe someone's getting injectables for years, and I depend on my injector to, let them know, hey, don't keep spending money on this. Let's go downstairs. Maybe it's time to consider a facelift, or at least save your money and put it toward that in the future. What we're doing here is becoming kind of fruitless. So it's that closed loop connection. And so they've got to be trained on what I can do surgically. I've got to be trained on what they can do with skin and maintaining my results. It's not just their training, it's mine too, right? So
Yeah, no.
it's all full circle.
You bring up a really good point, and I think that's the beauty of a surgical practice that has the non-surgical component that they built in. I'll talk to a lot of surgeons, and they want to be in the OR.
Yeah.
It's the love, and we know that, and I get it. Really, what they say is, I don't want to do injectables. It's not my love, and they really want someone else to do it. In fact,
And a
some
lot of us don't have time.
Right, right.
I'd have to work on Sundays to do my own injections. Yeah, I'll inject fat and things like that in the operating room, but I really have to rely on those physician extenders, and that's, I think, a great term, because they are an extension of what I'm doing.
Well, they're an extension of you, but they also are a crucial part to the patient journey. And that patient journey really doesn't start and stop with you any longer.
Right.
It really is an extension of all the things that you can deliver to them in the course of their time with your practice. And hopefully they're going to have a very long time with your practice.
Yeah,
And
that's the goal.
Exactly. So we've seen where injectables really have been symbiotic between surgery and non-surgery. We've seen where estheticians can provide the facials and the light peels, et cetera, to do that. I think the newest one in the arena, obviously, has been a very hot topic over the past 2 years, has been the weight loss and what we've seen there. Exactly. And so I know that you're on the committee for Hot Topics for the Society. So tell us a little bit about where weight loss has really been a factor that has either influenced or had a change in your practice.
I think it's been a miracle. And when I say that, I'm referring to GLP-1s, right? So semaglutide, tirzepatide, we've incorporated that into my practice for several reasons. I think, one of the biggest things was we've, as plastic surgeons, we all get patients who come in who maybe aren't candidates yet for surgery. They're thinking, hey, I just need some liposuction. I can't lose weight. Liposuction isn't for losing weight. It's for taking care of that diet and exercise resistant, those fat pockets that aren't going to go away no matter what. So the other, patient I would see is someone who has a lot of what we call visceral fat, which is that internal fat around the organs that you can't get to with liposuction. You can't even get to it with a tummy tuck. And so it was always a really frustrating endeavor to sit through that consultation and just try to tell these men and women, you need to lose weight first. You're not a surgical candidate. And then, we'd sit there for 30 more minutes while they're telling me I'm trying to eat right and I'm trying to exercise. And it's just, I can't lose weight the way I used to. And I felt helpless. There's nothing I can do to help you. And we all know there's insulin resistance. We know that with hormone changes and cortisol changes and sleep changes. All these things contribute, along with the processed diet, to where America has come to today, right?
Right.
For lack of a better way of putting it. And so it was just frustrating because, the patient's almost leaving in tears, like, oh, you can't help me. That was my last, hope that I could think of, and I'm frustrated because I have nothing to offer. Then this came along, and I feel like now I can say, hey, this is the start of the journey. Let's do this medication. Let's monitor you. Let's see you every month. And I do in-body scans in my office so we can really see where they're losing fat, where they're maybe losing muscle and need to be working out more. And we can come together and maybe 9 months, 12 months, however many months later, take another look and say, okay, now you have that loose skin we can take care of. Or maybe now you don't need surgery. Maybe now, your hips are where you want them to be. So that's been a game changer, really exciting part of a lot of our practices, I think.
I listened to you talk about it with such passion, but what comes to mind is I'll hear practices talk about this as I did it because I had to or they were going to leave.
Oh,
And I think that there's a component to that because it's retention,
sure.
and I get it, it's an outcome. But you talk about it as I want to help them solve the problem, and now we have a treatment for it.
It's amazing. I mean, before we brought it into the practice, we always start things out just kind of like, hey, let's have some staff members try it who are maybe
Yeah.
interested in this, right? I think my staff has collectively lost over 300 pounds together,
Wow.
and they're all so excited. And so, I mean, it's just so amazing to see that transformation. So it was a no-brainer. And yeah, you're right. It was a solution to a problem that I think we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, I love that you think about it with the patient in mind and where you're giving them an opportunity to solve it. Whereas, like I said, a lot of practices don't necessarily, they think of it as a necessary evil.
Oh,
And there's a lot of opportunity there. Let's talk about another hot topic, I think, in the industry right now, and that is, of course, med spas. And they're definitely a part of the aesthetics arena when I think about it. But it's the wild, wild west, I would say.
yeah. Yes, it is.
And for good reason, because there's demand. The market is demanding it. There's growth. There's opportunity. We have more and more people coming into the market to provide the services. And the regulations haven't really stopped people from actually opening or starting practices.
Right.
There's not necessarily society or board oversight. We also know that, as a plastic surgeon, you're held in check by your board, by your society. You don't do office-based surgery on a whim. You actually have to be in an accredited facility. And that's part of what holds you in check, especially when you go through maintenance of certification. That is not something that really is in play yet in the med spa arena,
Right.
which has become very frustrating because now we're starting to see patient deaths. We're starting to see incidences where there's been occurrences where there's been some liability that's probably coming from that because they don't necessarily have the safety precautions in place. But again, we have 50 states
Yeah.
and we have 50 different flavors of how we're going to run this. And not to say that we don't maybe have the regulations in certain states or in most of them. We just may not have the teams in place from the boards to actually hold them accountable
Yeah.
and enforce those rules. And so I think that it just really creates a different level of not just frustrations for, I think, plastic surgeons, but the community overall. Because the other part of this is plastic surgeons, you've been around this for many, many years. There's the bad reputation that comes from it.
From
when you think about
bad
it.
outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and then patients start to assume, okay, let's go back in time and talk about cosmetic surgery versus plastic surgery. It's one and the same, but it's who's doing it. And so I remember the society did a lot of work around emphasizing what is board certification? What does that mean?
Why is it different?
And why is it different? And so I know this is a hot topic because not only is it the regulatory component and the compliance, it's the level of competition now when you think about this. And when I think about, let's talk about orthopedic surgery or ophthalmology. An ophthalmology practice does ophthalmology. Their competition for ophthalmology is not going to be the orthopedic surgeon
Yeah.
or the plastic surgeon because they're going to stay in that lane because you're not trained to do it.
I'm not going to deliver babies.
Exactly. But
I've done it in medical school.
there you go.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, all of these specialties want to play in aesthetics. So AmSpa puts out statistics every year. They do surveying. And I think the number one type of specialty that enters into this market and opens med spas is primary care.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
Well, even different from that, in Nevada, nurse practitioners don't need an MD
Hmm.
to oversee their license and to oversee their treatments and procedures. So,
Yeah.
and the reason for that was because they wanted to open up more opportunities for rural health care in a state like Nevada where they don't have primary care doctors in these smaller towns and the outreach is more difficult. So that's where that law came into place. But I'll tell you, most NPs aren't out practicing in Winnemucca helping with wound care. They're opening their own medical spas. And some
Yeah.
of them are good, but I do worry a little bit about that when there is a horrible complication, which can happen just even with injectables, right? Blindness and necrosis of skin, things like this. Do you know how to do an orbital cut down to prevent that if that's the direction that's
Right.
going? Probably not. It's all fine if things are going well, but if things aren't going great, I think that's difficult. I think where it really gets a little bit sketchy is when you have non-surgically trained providers, even if they are MDs, trying to do surgery. And again, the Board of Plastic Surgery can't come down on them. They're not members
No.
of the Board of Plastic Surgery. They have their own board to deal with. The state medical board tries, but it's not illegal. So there's
Right.
not a lot they can do. To me, that's pretty scary. After 6 years of surgical training, we all hear about death with liposuction and bowel perforations and hitting the kidney with a cannula. I mean, those are risks even with a seasoned, well-trained plastic
That's right.
surgeon to some degree. But the chances of that happening are so much lower in the hands of a board certified plastic surgeon, in my opinion.
Well, that's why accreditation for office-based surgery centers became so critical, because there is a high standard for doing surgery
Yeah,
that you're held accountable to,
absolutely.
and the credentialing for the providers as well. And I'm not having the conversation to say that med spas don't have their place. I think
Right.
the important part is, and this is true for med spas, because med spas that are standalone, that maybe listening to this right now might say, but now you're cutting down what med spas are in the community. No, med spas will gain a bad reputation in this space for not being the best of what they can be to the community if this continues to be an issue where we have complications and we don't manage those complications well. And so I think there's good across the board as long as we all come to an understanding as to what is the right and the best way to do this.
Right, 100%.
So when we talk about hot topics, we talk about competition, what are some other areas that you think are really relevant in plastic surgery or aesthetics that
Yeah.
you think would be hot topics to even consider?
I'm glad you asked. I am co-chair for Hot Topics here at the aesthetic meeting, have been since 2019. We just had our session yesterday, so definitely fresh on my mind. And we did talk a lot about wellness, the GLP-1s and weight loss and kind of some of the new medications coming out onto the horizon. And we talked about things like exosomes and PRP and the usefulness there for quality of skin. We talked about rib remodeling, I think is fascinating. I learned a lot about that actually yesterday, and that's just to really get that snatched waist, as the young people say, often combined with, the BBL or the fat grafting to the buttocks, just to really get that body shape changed. I thought that was an interesting concept. Couple of new breast implants. Actually, we have a whole new company as of last year with FDA approval called Motiva in the States, and it's a beautiful implant, a really nice implant. And that one has been used for at least 15 years in Europe and South America, so it's not brand new. It's just brand new to us in the States, other than those who were involved in the clinical trials. So we learned a lot about that and their low rates of capsular contracture and their low rates of rupture. And just how they behave a little bit differently than the implants we've had on the market. And then Mentor has a new implant out that is really big. And
Okay.
historically with gel or silicone implants, the size limit has been, I think, roughly 800 cc's. This one goes up to, I want to say, 14 or 1500,
Wow.
which everyone says, oh my gosh, that sounds crazy. But when we look at the breast reconstruction market, and you have absolutely no breast tissue, especially on a more heavy-set woman who has historically had a lot of breast tissue, it actually looks very normal. And, then there are those who just want those big implants, but we're not using it aesthetically yet. It's been more on the reconstruction side. So I think that's been a really nice option to see. I think those are some of the bigger things that we talked about. There are several others. It's a 5-hour course, so I could go on and on.
Well, Dr. McCormack, it has been, I want to just say, delightful.
Thank you.
It's been refreshing to kind of hear about what's new and interesting and sharing the hot topics that are surgical. Fabulous. I really am excited to see where this goes and looking forward to potentially having you on our session again.
Absolutely.
Any last words or things that you would want to say when it comes to hot topics?
I think, we just have to, it's a balance of what's new and exciting and what's tried and true, and just, using your best judgment as to how to incorporate things that are new safely for your patients, if that makes sense.
No, totally.
But yeah, it's always good to be on the forefront, and it's always a great thing if you know about something when your patient brings it up to you, as opposed to I've never heard of that before. So it's always good to have heard about it first if it is a legitimate offering. But thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thanks for listening to Aesthetically Speaking, the podcast where beauty meets business, presented by Nextech. Follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Links to the resources mentioned on this podcast are available in your show notes. For more information about Nextech, visit nextech.com, or to learn more about TouchMD, go to touchmd.com. Aesthetically Speaking is a production of The Axis, THEAXIS.io.